With both Disney and Marvel already panicking over Ironheart episodes 1 through 3 and the ongoing ratings disaster that it is, there is also way too much focus on the LGBTQ community by the fandom in a negative manner. And it just needs to go away, I think, for a healthy story to grow, and for Riri to really share her limelight with...
Natalie AI thing seems utterly preposterous and ridiculous, and even for an MCU show, I'm finding it to be a little bit of a bridge too far to go. The Heist Crew, all lame. Every single one of them, all lame.
And so in this, I'm not sure what they're meant to be, because this character isn't to be confused with Slog.
Slug, our hacker extraordinaire.
Who is also the exact opposite in the same show. I'm really confused.
See, it deserves your attention. Ironheart deserves your attention. That's how I knew. I was like, oh, they are desperate to get people to watch this show. After I did my reaction, I kept getting, hey, it wasn't that bad. I just watched it. Hey, I just watched the first 3 episodes. It wasn't that bad.
Ironheart might be one of the worst executed ideas ever in the MCU, because under all that garbage was actually potential.
Yeah, and it's like the real Tony Stark. It's like back somehow, and there's like a moment where she's flying through and he's like, who is that? And she's like, I'm Ironheart, Mr. Stark. And he's like, I like that girl. And then he like goes to do something else. Like that would be like the level of something that I think would possibly happen.
Ironheart is back, this time going to an uncomfortable place for viewers.
Ironheart is the biggest L of Marvel of all time. The reactions are just spectacular. Supposedly he's smarter than Tony Stark, bites an electric wire, sells her soul to gain magic powers, uses new powers to steal. What did the writers mean by this? Smoke detector beeps.
I can understand why she's frustrated. That's how I feel watching her interviews.
How do you feel about the impact that she's having on young Black girls? And I'm going to be completely honest, on Black women.
You know, this is yet another area that's getting vibrant. It's getting full in the way that it should be.
Ironheart is practically unwatchable.
This show basically keyed their car, their mom, and in their bowl of cereal in the morning.
They have Dominique Thorne, you know, going out there talking about DEI, LGBTQ rights, and how there's no agenda there, and she continues to do so. But the other thing is that they also had Robert Downey Jr., and they had him roll out and really kind of prop the show up and prop the character of Riri Williams up above Tony Stark.
The latest update is in, and it confirms what many suspected. Disney's silence around Ironheart wasn't an accident. It was a strategy, and now Dominique Thorne is at the center of it all. If you've been following my videos on this topic, you already know Ironheart had one of the messiest rollouts in MCU history. Critics gave it a modest 77% on Rotten Tomatoes, while audiences tanked it into the low 30s before fans fought to bring it back up. Metacritic landed at a flat 57, putting it squarely in average territory. That split alone tells the story of a show caught between praise for its lead and disappointment in its execution. But here's where things get interesting. Disney didn't fight back. No marketing blitz, no cast interviews on primetime, no Comic-Con spotlight. Compare that to how Marvel once pushed She-Hulk or Ms. Marvel when Backlash hit. They rolled out the actors, the trailers, even viral TikTok campaigns. For Dominique Thorne, nothing. And that silence is fueling speculation that Disney wasn't invested in saving her big break at all. Meanwhile, Ryan Coogler addressed the racial undertones behind the backlash, openly saying the negativity wasn't just about pacing or story, but about who was leading the show. And while Coogler spoke up, Disney remained quiet. That's the difference. That's what makes fans believe this wasn't just clumsy marketing. It was a calculated pullback. And in today's update, it looks clearer than ever. Dominique Thorne wasn't the problem. The studio's strategy was. The first major storm around Ironheart wasn't the critic reviews, it was the fan scores. Almost immediately after the premiere, Rotten Tomatoes audience ratings sank into the low 30s. IMDb followed the same path, with thousands of one-star reviews pouring in before most viewers could have realistically seen more than a single episode. It wasn't just criticism, it looked coordinated.
We already know that those out there like Dominique Thorne, the main actress of the show who plays Riri Williams, after really going after fans and really going after the critics, it's only making matters worse for both Disney and Marvel.
And it wasn't the first time. Marvel has seen this before with Captain Marvel and Ms. Marvel, where online campaigns dragged scores down weeks before audiences gave the projects a fair shot. But here's where Ironheart stood out. This backlash was even sharper. Dominique Thorne's Riri Williams was positioned as the heir to Tony Stark's legacy, a role that instantly put her in the crosshairs. The narrative of replacing Iron Man became fuel for detractors, and the negative reviews focused less on the actual episodes and more on the idea of who was leading the MCU. Then came the counterattack. Loyal MCU fans launched their own campaign to defend the show, urging others to leave genuine reviews. Within days, the Rotten Tomatoes audience score climbed closer to 60%, showing there was a real-time battle between detractors and defenders. That kind of swing doesn't happen without heavy engagement on both sides. And here's the strangest part. Disney still said nothing. No official acknowledgement of the review bombing, no encouragement for fans to keep supporting the series, not even a hint that they recognized what was happening. Compare that to 2019, when Marvel actively defended Captain Marvel against similar attacks, rallying Brie Larson across interviews and rolling out promo campaigns. With Ironheart, Dominique Thorne was left to absorb the hit almost entirely on her own. The result? By the time critics' reviews, moderately positive at 77%, were being discussed, the audience perception was already poisoned. The story wasn't, Dominique Thorne delivers a strong debut. The story was, Ironheart is getting destroyed by fans. And without Disney's voice, that's the version that spread the fastest. While the audience scores turned into a battlefield, critics told a very different story. On Rotten Tomatoes, Ironheart managed a critic score around 77%. That's not record-breaking, but it's higher than some recent MCU outings like Secret Invasion or Eternals. Many reviewers agreed on one thing. Dominique Thorne was the best part of the show. Her performance as Riri Williams was described as confident, charismatic, and believable.
The thing about Ironheart is that yes, we do know that the last 3 episodes will be debuting tonight, by the way, really fulfilling the show for season 1, and I highly doubt that there's going to be a season 2, based on the ratings disaster that it is, based on the critics really calling this show out for what it is.
A rare case where an actor outshines the material they're given. But even with praise for Thorne, critics were quick to point out the flaws that dragged the series down. On Metacritic, Ironheart scored just 57 out of 100, landing in the dreaded mixed or average zone. Reviews highlighted weak pacing, dialogue that often lacked conflict, and an unclear central story engine. Instead of building momentum, the episodes felt like scattered pieces without a strong backbone tying them together. That's a problem Marvel has faced repeatedly in its Disney Plus shows. Solid performances, flashy action, but no compelling hook to keep viewers coming back week after week. Some critics also pointed to the tonal imbalance. One moment the show leaned into gritty realism. The next, it shifted into mystical territory with the introduction of the magical cape subplot. For many, it felt disjointed, like Marvel wasn't sure what Ironheart was supposed to be. And when you don't define your story clearly, audiences lose interest fast. What makes this worse is the comparison to Marvel's earlier hits. WandaVision had a clear, what's really going on here, right? Mystery. Loki built its identity around multiverse chaos and Tom Hiddleston's magnetic lead. Ironheart, on the other hand, struggled to answer the most basic question. What is this show really about? So even though Dominique Thorne delivered exactly what fans expected from her, the surrounding structure simply wasn't strong enough to carry her performance. Critics recognized her talent, but placed the blame squarely on Disney's shoulders for poor writing, poor pacing, and poor planning. And that split, praise for the lead, disappointment in the show, only added fuel to the idea that Dominique Thorne was being let down by the very studio that was supposed to make her a star. As the backlash against Ironheart grew louder, one voice cut through the noise: Ryan Coogler, the producer who first introduced Dominique Thorne to the MCU in Black Panther. Wakanda Forever didn't mince words. He admitted openly that the negativity surrounding Ironheart wasn't just about weak writing or pacing, it was about who was leading the show.
Certain is that this is a show that nobody asked for. This is also a show that is based on a comic back in 2016 that was canceled, quite frankly. That's also another fact that people have to realize. But focusing on Disney CEO Bob Iger and Kevin Feige, they are desperately trying to oversell this show to a degree that we have never seen before.
According to Coogler, the reaction had clear racial undertones, and ignoring that would mean ignoring the full picture. This was a bold move. Studios usually stay away from framing criticism in those terms, preferring to call it mixed reception or divided opinion. But Coogler went further, saying Ironheart was made with a deliberate lens, designed to speak to Black audiences and to viewers who wanted something different from Marvel's standard formula. That statement reframed the entire debate. It wasn't just, is this show good? It became, why is this show being targeted so aggressively? And history backs him up. Captain Marvel faced coordinated online attacks before it ever hit theaters. Ms. Marvel became the focus of culture war arguments despite being one of Marvel's most family-friendly stories. Even The Acolyte, released in mid-2024, was buried in controversy for tackling themes outside the traditional Star Wars comfort zone. Ironheart joined that same list, shows and films where the lead itself became the lightning rod. But here's the problem. While Ryan Coogler spoke up, Disney did not. The studio that once launched massive campaigns to defend Brie Larson or rally support for Iman Vellani chose silence this time. Dominique Thorne wasn't given the same protection or platform. Instead, she was left in the middle of a storm, while the company behind her quietly let the internet shape the narrative. That silence matters. It fueled speculation that Disney was cutting its losses, refusing to invest more energy into a series they didn't believe in. And in the process, it left Dominique Thorne exposed, forced to carry not only a divisive show, but also the weight of backlash far bigger than any one actress should have to bear. When the noise around Ironheart refused to die down, Dominique Thorne finally stepped in to address the criticism herself. Instead of dodging the tough questions, she leaned straight into them, especially around one of the most polarizing moments of the show. Episode 3, when Riri Williams allows John, a fellow gang member, to die rather than saving him. For many viewers, that scene sealed the idea that the character was poorly written. But Thorne explained that the decision wasn't sloppy writing, it was intentional. According to Thorne, Riri is a teenager thrown into an adult world of impossible stakes. She doesn't have Tony Stark's billions, she doesn't have decades of experience, and she certainly doesn't have the luxury of perfect decision-making. What she does have is trauma, survival instincts, and a brain working overtime to protect herself in an environment she was never meant to handle. Letting John die wasn't meant to make her look careless. It was meant to show her breaking point.
So let's get into this. Now, one thing about Bob Iger is that we know that I, along with many others out there, like to call him Bob Liger, because all this guy does is lie to the audience, he lies to the shareholders, he lies to anybody out there, in order to really kind of string them along into the following year in hopes that they will stay around, whether it's shareholders or customers. And we already know that Disney Plus is a failing platform.
Thorne called Riri a morally gray hero, one who doesn't fit into the clean-cut image audiences may be used to. And that's what she found fascinating, a flawed character struggling to live up to the legacy of Iron Man without the resources or charisma that made Tony Stark so magnetic. Her argument was simple. If you expect another Tony, you'll be disappointed. If you accept Riri as her own person, you'll see something different. A raw, imperfect human take on heroism. But here's the catch. Disney never framed it that way. In the marketing, Riri was sold as the next Iron Man, a pitch that raised expectations she was never designed to meet. Fans tuned in waiting for brilliance on par with Tony Stark, but instead they got a messy teenager learning in real time. Without Thorne's context, the disconnect felt like failure. With it, the show suddenly makes more sense. Unfortunately, by the time Thorne spoke up, the damage was done. The perception of Riri as unlikable had already spread, and that raised the uncomfortable truth. Was Dominique Thorne given a fair chance to define her character, or did Disney's missteps set her up to fail before she could even speak? Just when it seemed like Dominique Thorne was carrying the weight of Ironheart alone, the most unexpected ally stepped in. Robert Downey Jr. himself, the actor who defined Tony Stark and built the MCU from the ground up, publicly voiced his support for both Thorne and the series. After meeting her and watching the early episodes, Downey posted 3 words that sent shockwaves through Marvel fandom. I love it. And then came the message that mattered most. Iron Man loves Ironheart. On paper, that should have been a game-changing moment. For years, Riri Williams has been compared to Tony Stark, fairly or not. Was she charismatic enough? Was she inventive enough? Did she deserve to inherit the Iron legacy? With Downey's words, the answer was clear: yes. He passed the symbolic torch, validating Thorne as worthy of carrying on the Iron Man mantle in her own way. But here's where it gets strange. Disney didn't seize on this golden opportunity. Imagine if Marvel had used Downey's quote in trailers, posters, or late-night interviews. Iron Man Loves Ironheart could have rebranded the series overnight, silencing critics and reframing the narrative around a powerful endorsement. Instead, the moment barely made headlines, circulating mostly in fan spaces online.
It is a failing business model for, of course, Disney. You know, we already know that Tony Gilroy admitted to this, the guy who created the Andor series, both Season 1 and Season 2. Disney just doesn't have the amount of money that they have anymore to create all of these shows. However, interestingly enough, with the Ironheart ratings disaster only getting worse for those at Disney and Marvel,
this silence speaks volumes. It suggests that even with one of the most bankable stars in Marvel history giving his blessing, the studio didn't want to invest more energy into boosting Ironheart. Compare that to how Marvel leveraged every ounce of goodwill from Tom Hiddleston during Loki's run, or Elizabeth Olsen during WandaVision. In Thorne's case, the company held back, and fans noticed. For Dominique Thorne, Downey's support was priceless. It showed that the man behind Iron Man believed in her, even if the studio behind her seemed reluctant. And it reinforced the growing theory that Disney wasn't protecting its rising star at all. It was leaving her to sink or swim, no matter how much outside support she received. The situation with Ironheart doesn't stand alone. It fits into a troubling pattern we've seen across Disney's biggest projects. When you zoom out, Dominique Thorne's experience starts to look less like an isolated stumble and more like part of a systemic problem. Take Snow White. Even before release, reports of troubled reshoots and lackluster test screenings flooded the internet. Instead of addressing concerns head-on, Disney delayed the film and trimmed its marketing, creating the impression that they were simply trying to bury it. When the movie finally landed, it didn't spark excitement. It confirmed that the studio's silence had been a warning sign all along. Then there's The Acolyte, the 2024 Star Wars project that should have been a bold step forward. Instead, it got drowned in controversy. Critics pointed to uneven pacing and confused themes, while online debates turned the series into a culture war lightning rod. Disney's response? Minimal. They pushed the show out, let the backlash flare up, and then moved on. No major defense, no strong counter-campaign. Sound familiar? And finally, Fantastic Four. This was supposed to be Marvel's next crown jewel, but early test screenings have already been labeled flat, and insiders report reshoots that suggest the studio is scrambling. It's the same cycle. Troubled production, weak early buzz, reactive rather than proactive handling. Ironheart followed this exact template. A rushed release window, minimal marketing, silence in the face of backlash, and a lead actor left to shoulder criticism without meaningful studio support.
Already those like Kevin Feige and Bob Iger are heading into damage control mode at a level that we have never seen before. In this case, Bob Iger got very defensive after the LGBTQ backlash, and also in the midst of the ratings beginning to tank already. Now, Iger recently delivered the following in a desperate move to damage control the situation.
The playbook is becoming clear. Instead of investing in long-term storytelling, Disney seems to be cutting costs, pushing projects out quickly, and hoping brand recognition alone will carry them. The problem? Fans have started noticing. And once audiences connect the dots between projects, every new release arrives with baggage. Instead of being excited for Dominique Thorne's big debut, viewers approached Ironheart already skeptical, expecting it to fail because of the pattern they've seen before. That skepticism becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, which raises the bigger question: if Disney doesn't change course, how many more stars will see their breakout moments sabotaged by the very studio meant to launch them? When you look at Ironheart in isolation, it's easy to blame weak writing or uneven pacing for the backlash. But when you place it alongside Snow White, The Acolyte, and the ongoing Fantastic Four troubles, the picture becomes clearer. This isn't just about Dominique Thorne or one series, it's about Disney's larger strategy, and whether that strategy is actively undercutting its own stars. From the rushed 2-week release to the absence of a meaningful marketing push, Disney's handling of Ironheart felt like a studio pulling back rather than leaning in. That silence amplified the review bombing, allowed critics to define the narrative, and left Dominique Thorne without the institutional support she needed. Even Robert Downey Jr.'s endorsement, Iron Man's Ironheart, wasn't leveraged into the cultural moment it could have been. And when Ryan Coogler openly addressed the racial dynamics behind the backlash, the lack of follow-through from Disney only fueled suspicions that they were ready to move on, rather than defend their new lead. So, was Dominique Thorne sabotaged? Some will argue yes, that the studio deliberately downplayed her debut to minimize financial risk, essentially sacrificing her breakout role to protect the brand. Others will say it's just bad strategy, a continuation of the missteps Marvel has been making since Endgame, where even promising projects collapse under poor planning. Either way, the outcome is the same: a young actor with undeniable talent left exposed in one of the harshest media environments imaginable. And yet, even through all of this, Thorne has proven herself. Critics recognized her as the strongest part of the show. She framed Riri Williams as a bold, morally complex character, and she now has the symbolic support of Robert Downey Jr. himself. That's not failure, that's resilience. The real failure lies in how Disney chose to handle her moment. The question that remains isn't whether Dominique Thorne can rise above this. She already has. The question is whether Disney can stop repeating the same cycle before the audience loses faith in the entire MCU. Because if Ironheart was handled this way, what does that say about Marvel's future? So where do you stand? Was this Disney's bad strategy, or did they truly sabotage Dominique Thorne's big break? Share your thoughts below. Hit like if you enjoyed the breakdown, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.